The clink of a water glass against the polished mahogany was the loudest sound in the boardroom, a tiny, sharp punctuation mark in a silence thick with tension. It was Julian's glass, of course. He was the only one in the room comfortable enough to make a sound. He took a slow, deliberate sip, his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, sweeping over the 20 somber faces lining the table. They were the board of Penhaligon Corp., the titans of industry and finance who held the fate of a global empire in their hands, and every single one of them was avoiding looking at the man at the head of the table. Every one of them except Julian. His gaze lingered on his uncle, a cruel mix of pity and triumph. Arthur Penhaligon, the architect of that empire, was a ghost at his own feast. He sat slumped in a ridiculously advanced wheelchair, his head lolling slightly to one side, a cashmere blanket draped over his useless legs. His eyes, once sharp enough to dissect a rival's balance sheet from 100 paces, were open but vacant, staring at a fixed point on the far wall. A thin line of drool escaped the corner of his mouth, and a silent, uniformed nurse dabbed it away with practiced efficiency. "As you can see," Julian said, his voice smooth as silk but laced with steel, "my uncle's condition is unchanged. The doctors have been clear. There is no prognosis for recovery. None. It is a tragedy, a profound tragedy." He paused, letting the feigned sorrow hang in the air. "But the company cannot remain in this state of limbo. We need leadership, a firm hand. Therefore, I must, with the heaviest of hearts, formally move to have Arthur Penhaligon declared legally incapacitated, and to enact the succession protocol, naming me as acting CEO." He looked around the table, daring anyone to object. No one did. Their silence was their consent. But from the corner of the room, near the service doors where a cleaning cart stood half hidden, a small gasp went unnoticed by all but one. Inside Arthur Penhaligon's mind, a silent scream of pure, impotent rage echoed in the vast, empty prison of his own skull. "No, you will not do this, you vulture. You will not." His entire being, every fiber of his consciousness, strained to make a single muscle twitch, to make a sound, to do anything but sit here and watch his life's work be stolen by the serpent he had raised as a son. And then he felt it, a flicker, an infinitesimal, barely there flutter of his left eyelid. It was nothing, a neurological ghost, but it was his. And across the vast expanse of the boardroom, a little girl with wide, curious eyes, half peeking from behind her mother's skirt, saw it too. She tilted her head, her brow furrowed, and for a fleeting second her gaze locked with the hollow stare of the broken man in the wheelchair. She saw the flicker, and she didn't look away. The world for Arthur had shrunk to the dimensions of his penthouse suite. It was a gilded cage, a masterpiece of minimalist architecture with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's-eye view of the city he had once commanded. Now the sprawling metropolis was nothing more than a silent, moving tapestry, a constant reminder of a life that was no longer his. His days were a relentless, monotonous cycle, measured not in hours, but in procedures. The morning sponge bath, the cloying sweetness of the nutritional paste syringed into his feeding tube, the soft creak of the hoist transferring his dead weight from bed to chair, the endless, mind-numbing drone of the daytime television his nurses assumed he enjoyed. They spoke to him, but not with him. They spoke around him, over him, about him, their voices a soft, condescending drone. "How are we feeling today, Mr. Penhaligon?" Time for our feed. He seems a bit agitated today, don't you think, Clara? Probably just gas. They saw a shell, a collection of failing biological systems to be managed. They had no idea of the raging inferno of intellect and frustration trapped inside. He was a prisoner of his own flesh, a king locked in the deepest dungeon of his own castle, able to see and hear everything but influence nothing. He would try. Oh, how he would try. He would marshal all his willpower, focusing on a single finger, commanding it to move, to twitch, to do anything. He'd visualize the neural pathways, the electrical impulses, the sinews and muscles, a desperate general trying to send a message to a rebellious, unresponsive army. Nothing. The betrayal of his own body was a constant, searing agony, far worse than any physical pain. His memories were his only solace and his greatest torture. He remembered the feeling of a squash racket in his hand, the satisfying thwack of the ball against the wall. He remembered the biting wind on his face as he sailed his yacht, the taste of salt on his lips. He remembered the scent of a woman's perfume, the husky timbre of her laugh in the dark. He remembered the thrill of a hostile takeover, the adrenaline of outsmarting his enemies. These memories were vivid, alive, and they taunted him with the ghost of a man he could no longer be. Julian visited twice a week. He would pull up a chair, always a little too close, and monologue about the company. He'd detail the deals he was making, the people he was firing, the changes he was implementing, all under the guise of keeping his dear uncle informed. But Arthur heard the subtext. It was a victory tour. Every word was a spadeful of dirt on his grave. "Had to let go of Henderson, Uncle," Julian would say with a sigh, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. "Loyal man, Henderson, but old-fashioned. We need a new vision." My vision? Arthur would scream in his head. "Henderson has been with me for 30 years. He is the most loyal man I know. And the new acquisitions in the tech sector are performing beyond all expectations," Julian would preen. "Risky," the old guard said, "but you have to be bold, don't you? You taught me that. I taught you to be smart, not reckless. You're leveraging the company to the hilt, you arrogant fool. You're going to run it into the ground." But all that came out was a soft, guttural sigh, a puff of air that the nurse would interpret as fatigue. The day of the board meeting had been the nadir, the lowest point of his descent into this living hell. Watching Julian circle like a shark, smelling the blood in the water, had ignited a fire in him he thought had long been extinguished. And then, the flicker. He hadn't imagined it. In the maelstrom of his rage, a single, tiny command had gotten through. An eyelid, a muscle no bigger than a fingernail had obeyed him, and the girl had seen it. He remembered her. He'd seen her before, a quiet little thing who sometimes accompanied her mother, the new cleaner. She would sit on a little stool in the hallway while her mother worked, drawing in a notebook, her small world contained within the lines of her pencil. He hadn't paid her much mind before. She was just part of the scenery, another member of the invisible army that kept his gilded cage pristine. But now her face was seared into his memory. The way she had looked at him, not with fear or pity or disgust, but with simple, unadulterated curiosity. It was a look he hadn't received from anyone in a very long time. A few days later, the girl was there again. Her name, he learned from the nurse's chatter, was Lily. Her mother's name was Maria. While Maria polished the already gleaming marble floors of the main gallery, Lily sat on her usual stool. But this time she wasn't drawing. She was just watching him. Arthur was in his wheelchair by the vast windows, positioned by the nurse to enjoy the view. He was tired of the view. He was tired of everything. But he watched her back in the reflection in the glass. She was small for her age, maybe 7 or 8, with dark, serious eyes, and a cascade of unruly black hair tied back in a ponytail. She held a worn-out-looking teddy bear in her lap, its button eyes staring blankly ahead. For almost an hour, she just sat there, watching him, not staring exactly. It was more like she was studying him, the way a scientist might study a strange new creature. Arthur found it unnerving and, strangely, intriguing. No one looked at him like that anymore. Finally, her mother finished her work. "Come, mija," Maria said softly, her voice tired. "Time to go." Lily didn't move. She just continued to watch him. "Lily," her mother prompted, a little more firmly this time. Lily slipped off the stool, and instead of going to her mother, she took a few hesitant steps towards Arthur's wheelchair. Maria's breath hitched. "Lily, no. Don't bother Mr. Penhaligon." But the girl ignored her. She walked right up to the side of his chair, her head barely reaching the armrest. She stood there for a long moment, her dark eyes scanning his face. Arthur's heart, a sluggish, tired muscle, began to beat a little faster. He could smell the faint, clean scent of her, like soap and sunshine. She reached out a tiny hand, not to touch him, but to touch the cool metal of his chair. Then she looked up at his face again, her expression unreadable. "Hello," she whispered, her voice so soft it was barely a breath. The nurse, who had been engrossed in a magazine, looked up, startled. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't be in here." Lily didn't seem to hear. Her entire focus was on Arthur. She leaned in a little closer, her whisper conspiratorial. "I saw you," she said. "In the big room. You blinked." Arthur's world tilted on its axis. She had seen it. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a phantom. It was real. A surge of something hot and powerful, something that felt terrifyingly like hope, coursed through him. He focused all of his energy, all of his desperate will, on that one tiny muscle. He poured every ounce of his being into the command. Blink. Blink now. For a second, nothing happened. The muscle, dormant for so long, refused to obey. But then it did. His left eyelid, slowly, achingly, fluttered down and then up again. A single, deliberate blink. Lily's eyes widened, and a slow, brilliant smile spread across her face. It was like watching the sun rise. "You did it again," she breathed, her voice filled with a hushed wonder. Maria rushed forward and gently took her daughter's arm. "Lily, I am so sorry, Mr. Penhaligon. She has a very active imagination." She began to pull the girl away, but Lily twisted around, her eyes still locked on Arthur's. "He did it, Mama. I saw him. He's talking to me." Maria just shook her head, a sad, apologetic smile on her face as she hurried her daughter out of the room. "Come on, mija. Let the man rest." The room was silent again, but something had fundamentally changed. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the echo of a little girl's whisper and the reverberation of a single, impossible blink. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Arthur Penhaligon was not entirely alone. The girl and her blink became his obsession. He spent his waking hours practicing, focusing his will, trying to replicate the action. It was Herculean work. Sometimes he would strain for hours, sweat beading on his brow, his mind screaming commands, only to be met with absolute stillness. Other times, After a period of rest, he would manage a faint, weak flutter. He learned that it was not about force, but about a kind of mental finesse, a gentle coaxing of the nerve and muscle. He hoarded his energy for the afternoons, when Maria and Lily were scheduled to clean his floor. He would watch the door, his anticipation a tight knot in his chest. Most days, Lily would just sit in the hall, and he would watch her in the reflection, practicing his blink, hoping she would see. Then one day, she came in again. Her mother was dusting in the adjoining library, out of sight, but within earshot. Lily tiptoed over to him, her teddy bear clutched in her hand. "Can you do it today?" she whispered. Arthur summoned all his strength. He blinked, yes. A giddy thrill shot through him. Lily smiled, a co-conspirator. "I have a secret code," she said, her voice dropping even lower. "I used it with my abuela, after she got sick and couldn't talk much." She held up her small hand. "One time means yes." She blinked one of her own eyes slowly. "Two times means no." She blinked twice in quick succession. It was so simple, so perfect. A binary language, the foundation of everything. He felt a wave of gratitude so powerful, it almost overwhelmed him. This child, this tiny, insignificant in the grand scheme of things child, was offering him the key to his own prison. He looked at her, and for the first time, he saw her not just as a girl, but as a lifeline. An angel in a faded t-shirt and scuffed sneakers. He had to answer her. He had to show her he understood. He waited a beat, then blinked once. Yes, her smile was his reward. "Okay," she said, her expression turning serious. "Let's practice." She began to ask him simple questions, her voice a soft murmur. "Is your name Arthur?" He blinked once. "Yes." "Are you sleepy?" He blinked twice. "No." "Is the sky blue?" "Yes." "Do you like oatmeal?" She wrinkled her nose. He blinked twice, with as much emphasis as he could muster. "No." A giggle escaped her. "Me neither. It's gooey." The sound was like music. He hadn't heard a child's laugh in his own home for years. Not since, He pushed the thought away. He couldn't afford to be distracted by the ghosts of the past. The future was sitting right in front of him, asking him questions about oatmeal. Their clandestine sessions became a ritual. Lily would find excuses to slip into his room while her mother worked. She was clever, sensing instinctively that this was a secret to be guarded. She would pretend to be looking at a painting or adjusting his blanket. And in those stolen moments, they would communicate. The world began to open up for Arthur, one yes-no question at a time. He was no longer a passive observer. He was a participant, albeit a severely limited one. He learned about her. Her bear was named Barnaby. Her favorite color was yellow, like the sun. She was afraid of spiders. She missed her grandmother. He, in turn, began to assert his own preferences for the first time since the accident. One day, the nurse, Clara, put on the television. "Some nice classical music for you, Mr. Penhaligon." Soothing. On the screen, an orchestra sawed away at a Vivaldi piece he'd always despised. It was auditory wallpaper, bland and predictable. When Lily came in, her first question was, "Do you like this music?" He blinked twice. No. She looked at the television, then back at him. "Is there something else you want to listen to?" Yes. This was a new level of complexity. How could he tell her what he wanted? She seemed to understand his dilemma. "Is it rock music?" No. "Is it, what's that stuff Mama listens to? Latin music?" No. "Is it old music? From a long time ago?" "Yes." "Like jazz?" He summoned every ounce of his energy and blinked once. A firm, decisive blink. Yes. Lily's eyes lit up. She walked over to the state-of-the-art sound system, a sleek black box that no one had touched in months. She looked at the myriad of buttons with trepidation. She was, after all, only a child. But she was a determined one. She found the power button. Then she began to press other buttons at random. A blast of static filled the room, making Arthur jump internally. Then a pop station, a news report. Lily kept trying, her small face set in concentration. Finally, a lazy, soulful saxophone melody filled the air, a classic Miles Davis track. It was like a balm on his raw nerves. He closed his eyes, a real, voluntary closing, and let the music wash over him. He blinked once, slowly, without her even asking. It was a blink of pure, unadulterated thanks. Lily stood by the stereo, beaming, a little knight who had slain the dragon of Vivaldi. From that day on, the penthouse was filled with the sounds of Coltrane, Ellington, and Thelonious Monk. The nurses were baffled. "He seems to be responding to the jazz," Clara remarked to her colleague one day. "His heart rate is always much calmer when it's playing. Strange. I had him pegged as a classical man." They didn't see the little girl who would slip in and, with a series of blinks, act as the world's most unlikely DJ. Their communication was a secret garden, a fragile world they had built together. But secrets, especially in a house full of staff, are hard to keep. Maria was the first to notice the change. It wasn't just the jazz music. It was the way Lily would talk about Mr. Penhaligon. She no longer referred to him as the quiet man. It was always Arthur. "Arthur doesn't like the color gray," she would announce at dinner. "It makes him feel sad." Or, "Arthur told me he used to have a dog named Winston." Maria would smile indulgently, assuming it was a child's fantasy, a lonely girl creating a friend out of a tragic figure. But a part of her was uneasy. The Penhaligon family was a labyrinth of power and money and whispers of scandal. Her daughter was a guileless soul, and Maria's instinct was to protect her from that world. One afternoon, she finished her work early. She came to collect Lily and found the door to Arthur's room slightly ajar. She peeked inside. The room was quiet except for the low hum of medical equipment and the soft strains of a piano from the speakers. Lily was sitting on the floor by Arthur's wheelchair, her back to the door. She was holding a book. "This one is about a dragon who is afraid of flying," Lily was saying softly. "His name is Ferdinand. Do you want me to read it to you?" Maria watched as Arthur Penhaligon's left eyelid fluttered. Once. Yes. Maria's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. It wasn't a twitch. It wasn't a spasm. It was a blink. Slow, deliberate, and clearly in response to her daughter's question. She watched, frozen in the doorway, as Lily began to read, her small, clear voice filling the room. And as she read, she would pause occasionally to ask a question. "Do you think Ferdinand is brave for admitting he's scared?" A single blink. "Should his friends make fun of him?" 2 rapid blinks. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. It was real. This wasn't a game. Her daughter was communicating with a man the entire world had written off as a vegetable. She felt a confusing cocktail of emotions: awe at her daughter's empathy, fear of the implications, and a profound, aching sadness for the man trapped in the chair. Later that evening, after she had tucked Lily into bed, Maria sat in their small apartment, the city lights twinkling far below. She couldn't shake the image from her mind. The silent, broken billionaire and her tiny, talkative daughter, sharing a story about a dragon. She had a choice to make. she could put a stop to it, forbid Lily from seeing him, and retreat back into the safety of anonymity. It was the sensible thing to do. Julian Penhaligon, with his cold eyes and predatory smile, unnerved her. She didn't want him ever looking in her or Lily's direction. But she also thought of the man in the chair. She had seen his chart once, left open by a careless nurse. Locked-in syndrome. A mind perfectly intact, aware of everything, but unable to command the body. The horror of it was unimaginable. What Lily was doing, it was more than just a secret code. She was giving him back a piece of his humanity. How could she take that away? From him, or from her daughter, who was blossoming with a newfound sense of purpose? The next day, Maria approached Lily with a heavy heart. "Mija," she said gently, "I know about your secret with Mr. Penhaligon." Lily's face fell. "You're not mad?" "No, my love, I'm not mad." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But this is very grown up. What you are doing is a very big thing, and we have to be very, very careful. No one else can know. Not the nurses, not Mr. Julian. No one. Do you understand?" Lily nodded, her expression serious. "It's our secret," she affirmed. Maria had made her decision. She would not stand in the way. She would stand guard. She would be the silent protector of their secret garden. The yes-no system was a miracle, but it was also a straitjacket. Arthur's mind was a torrent of complex thoughts, opinions, and memories, and he was trying to express them through a keyhole. Frustration was a constant companion. There were so many things he wanted to say, so many things he needed to ask, the most pressing of which was Julian. He needed to know what his nephew was doing to his company. But how to ask? "Are you performing a forensic audit of the third quarter acquisitions in the Asian markets?" With a yes or a no. They needed a new system. The idea came to him in the middle of the night, a spark in the darkness of his silent consciousness. A grid, the alphabet. He'd seen it in a movie once, about a man in a similar condition. It was a simple concept. A grid of letters, 5 rows, 5 columns, combining as I and J. The person would blink to indicate the row number, then again for the column number. 1 blink for the first row, 2 for the second, and so on. It would be slow, painstaking, but it would allow him to spell. It would give him a voice. The next day, he waited anxiously for Lily. When she arrived, he was practically vibrating with restrained urgency. Their usual Q&A session began, but Arthur refused to play along. "Are you feeling okay today, Arthur?" Lily asked. He did nothing. No blink. "Do you want me to change the music?" Still nothing. Lily frowned, her brow crinkling in concern. She moved closer. "Are you mad at me?" He blinked twice, sharply. "No." Then he blinked once. Yes, then he did nothing. He was trying to confuse her, to break the pattern, to show her that the old way was no longer enough. The little girl was preternaturally perceptive. She seemed to sense his frustration. She sat on her stool, tapping her chin, studying him. "You want to say something else," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. He blinked once, a huge, relieved blink. "Yes." "Something that isn't yes or no." "Yes." She fell silent, thinking. Arthur screamed at her in his mind. The alphabet! Think of the letters. A board. A chart. But he had no way to transmit the thought. He could only wait and hope. Lily's eyes scanned the room, looking for inspiration. They passed over the books, the paintings, the television. They landed on the small framed photo on his bedside table. It was the only personal item the nurses had kept out. It was a picture of him with his late sister, Julian's mother, taken years ago when they were children. Lily picked it up. "This is you," she said, pointing to the small boy with the toothy grin. "Yes." "You were smiling." "Yes." Then she pointed to the inscription at the bottom of the silver frame. It was a quote his sister had loved. "The beginning of all things is small." Lily's finger traced the engraved letters. A, B, C, D. Her eyes widened. She looked from the letters on the frame to his face, a dawning realization in her expression. "Letters," she whispered. "You want to spell." It was one of the most triumphant moments of Arthur's new life. He blinked once, a long, heartfelt blink that felt like a standing ovation. Yes! It took them another week to perfect the system. Lily, with the solemnity of a master engineer, created the board. She took a piece of cardboard from a packing box in the recycling and painstakingly drew the grid with a purple crayon. A B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. She would point to the first row. "Is the letter in this row?" If he blinked yes, she would then point to each letter in that row. "A, B, C," until he blinked again. It was brutally slow. A single word could take 10 minutes. A sentence could take an hour. But it was a voice. His first word was Lily. She had held up the board, and he had blinked for the third row, then the third letter. L, then the second row, fourth letter. I, then the third row again. L, and finally the fifth row, fourth letter. Y. When she understood, she dropped the board, her hands flying to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. "You spelled my name," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He blinked once. "Yes." And in his mind, he added, "Because you have given me back mine." Their secret sessions took on a new urgency. Lily would arrive with the crayon-covered board hidden in her storybook, and they would get to work. Arthur's mind, starved for so long, felt like it was exploding with things to say. He was rusty. His thoughts were a tangled mess, and it was hard to distill them into the simple, declarative sentences the board required. But with each letter, each word, he felt a piece of himself returning. He told her about Winston, his golden retriever, how he used to sneak him pieces of steak under the dinner table. He told her about his first boat, a tiny little skiff he'd named the Arrow. He told her things he hadn't thought about in years, memories unlocked by the simple act of giving them voice. He also began to ask questions. He started simply, testing the waters. He asked Lily about her school, her friends, her dreams. He learned she wanted to be an astronomer, to discover a new star and name it after her abuela. He felt a pang in his chest, a mix of admiration for her boundless spirit and a bitter regret for his own wasted years, chasing profits instead of stars. As he grew more confident, his questions turned to the present. He needed to be careful. He didn't want to scare her or Maria, but he had to know. The next time Julian visited, Arthur paid excruciatingly close attention. Julian, as usual, sat and gloated, detailing his latest corporate conquests. He talked about a new acquisition, a biotech firm called OmniGen. It was a huge, risky purchase, funded by selling off several of Penhaligon's most stable, long-term assets. It was exactly the kind of move Arthur would have counseled against. It was flashy, arrogant, and fundamentally unsound. Julian's ego was writing checks the company couldn't cash. After Julian left, leaving the scent of his expensive cologne and self-satisfaction lingering in the air, Arthur waited for Lily. When she arrived, he was ready. He bypassed the usual pleasantries. He had her hold up the board. T, H, E, F, I, R, M. 3 words. It took them nearly the entire hour. Lily read them back, confused. The firm? He blinked once. Yes. Then he began another word. S-A-F-E. The firm. Safe? She asked, her voice uncertain. He blinked twice. No. A cold knot of dread formed in Arthur's gut. He had just confirmed his deepest fears. But it was the next series of words that changed everything. It took 3 full sessions, spread over a week. Lily was patient, never complaining about the glacial pace. He guided her, letter by agonizing letter. W-A-T-C-H-J-U-L-I-A-N. When the final word was spelled out, Lily looked at it, her brow furrowed. "Watch Julian?" she whispered. He blinked once, a hard, sharp blink. Yes. Then his final word for the day. D-A-N-G-E-R. Lily's eyes grew wide. The game was over. She understood, with the profound clarity of a child, that this was real. The quiet man was not just telling her stories about his dog. He was scared, and he was trying to warn her. The word danger hung in the air between them, changing the atmosphere of their secret meetings. The innocence was gone, replaced by a shared, unspoken gravity. Lily was more subdued, her questions more cautious. She understood she was now a guardian of a secret far more serious than a man's preference for jazz. Arthur, for his part, was consumed by a terrifying sense of urgency and helplessness. He had a voice, but it was a whisper in a hurricane. How could a little girl and a paralyzed man stand against someone as ruthless and powerful as Julian? He needed an ally. There was only one person he had ever trusted implicitly, the only person whose intellect and integrity he considered a match for his own. Eleanor Vance, his lawyer for over 40 years, and the closest thing he'd ever had to a real friend. The problem was getting to her. He couldn't exactly pick up the phone, and sending Lily with a cryptic message was too risky. Julian had eyes and ears everywhere. He had to be smart. He had to use the system he had. His next message to Lily was simple. B-O-O-K, then L-I-B-R-A-R-Y. Lily looked confused but led the way, pushing his wheelchair into the vast 2-story library, a room he hadn't been in since the accident. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and leather. It was his sanctuary, a repository of knowledge and memory. He directed her with his blinks. This shelf? No. This one? Yes. This book? No. They moved slowly along the towering shelves. It was a strange, silent treasure hunt. Finally, they reached a section on maritime law. He had her stop. He focused on a thick, leather-bound volume. Blackwood's Precedents in Admiralty, 1884. It was an obscure text he doubted anyone had opened in a century. This one? Lily asked, her small hands struggling to pull the heavy book from the shelf. Yes. The book thudded onto the library table. Open it, he spelled out. Lily opened the cover. Tucked inside was a small, flat brass key. It was old and ornate. A key? She whispered. Yes. His next instructions were the most important he had ever given. TAKEYEYGIVETOEL It took the better part of 2 hours to spell it all out. He repeated the name Eleanor Vance several times to make sure Lily had it right. The final word was the most crucial. Arrow. It was his old code word with Eleanor, from back when they were young and hungry, battling corporate raiders. It meant drop everything. This is life or death. If the key didn't get her attention, the code word would. Lily stared at the key in her palm. She looked from the key to his face, her own etched with the fear that tore at his heart. He was asking too much of her. She was a child, not a spy? He was about to spell out Nevermind when she closed her little hand around the key, her expression hardening with resolve. "Okay, Arthur," she said, her voice firm. "I'll do it." Getting the key to Eleanor was a logistical nightmare. Maria, to her eternal credit, did not ask questions she didn't want the answers to. When Lily explained, in the simple, direct language of a child, that Arthur needed her to deliver a key to a lady named Eleanor Vance, Maria simply nodded. She saw the fear and determination in her daughter's eyes, and her own maternal instinct took over. She found the law firm's address online. The next day, she called in sick to her second job, a sacrifice their fragile budget could barely afford. She dressed Lily in her Sunday best, and they took the bus downtown. The offices of Vance, Covington & Crowe were the epitome of old-world power. Polished brass, dark wood, hushed whispers. The receptionist, a woman with hair like a helmet, looked down her nose at the cleaning woman and her child. "May I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she very much doubted it. "We are here to see Eleanor Vance," Maria said, her voice shaking slightly, but her posture ramrod straight. "We don't have an appointment." "Ms. Vance does not see people without an appointment." "Please," Lily piped up, stepping forward. "It's from Arthur Penhaligon." The receptionist's expression flickered. The name still carried weight. "And he sent you?" she asked, her disbelief unconcealed. Lily held out her small hand, opening it to reveal the brass key. "He said to give you this, and to say, Arrow." The word was a thunderclap in the quiet reception area. The receptionist's composure cracked. She picked up her phone, her eyes wide, and spoke in a hushed, urgent tone. 2 minutes later, a side door opened and a woman emerged. Eleanor Vance was in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense aura that could curdle milk. She wore a tailored gray suit that probably cost more than Maria's car. She looked from the key in the receptionist's hand to the small girl and her mother. Her gaze was intense, analytical. "You said Arrow?" she asked, her voice raspy. Lily nodded, Eleanor's eyes fixed on the girl. "Who gave this to you?" "Arthur did," Lily said simply. Eleanor led them into her office, a corner suite with a view that mirrored Arthur's. She closed the door. She didn't offer them a seat. She just stood there, the key in her hand, her mind clearly working at a furious pace. "How?" she finally asked, the word sharp as a shard of glass. "How did he give this to you? How did he speak to you?" And so the story came out. Maria, hesitant at first, and then Lily, more confident, explained about the blinks, about the yes and no, about the crayon-covered alphabet board. Eleanor listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. She walked over to her desk, picked up a pen, and scribbled on a legal pad. She turned it around. On it, she had written one word: Winston. She looked at Lily. "Ask him who this was." It was a test. Arthur had told Eleanor stories about his dog for years. It was a detail no one else would know. The next afternoon was the most nerve-wracking of Arthur's life. He waited for Lily, his mind a whirlwind of hope and fear. What if Eleanor had dismissed them? What if she thought it was a cruel prank? When Lily finally arrived, her face was grave. She walked straight over to him, her storybook clutched in her hand. She leaned in close. "Eleanor said to ask you a question," she whispered. "She wants to know, who was Winston?" Arthur's world erupted in silent, joyous celebration. She believed them. Eleanor believed them. He had his ally. With Lily holding the alphabet board, he began to spell MYDOGBEST, Eleanor Vance moved with the speed and precision of a predator. The next day, she arrived at the penthouse unannounced, armed with a court order granting her full access to her client. She swept past a flustered Julian, who had been in the middle of a meeting in the living room, her expression a mask of cold fury. "Julian," she said, her voice dripping with ice, "get out. I need to speak with my client. Alone." She dismissed the nurses with a wave of her hand and closed the door to Arthur's room, leaving a stunned and suspicious Julian in the hallway. She walked over to Arthur's chair. Her composure, so formidable moments before, crumbled. Her eyes welled with tears as she looked at the wreck of a man who had been her friend for nearly a half-century. "Oh, Arthur," she whispered, her hand gently touching his shoulder. "What have they done to you?" He wanted to comfort her, to tell her it was all right, but he couldn't. He could only watch as she fought to regain her composure. She took a deep breath, her lawyer persona snapping back into place. "Lily told me everything," she said, pulling a chair close. "She brought the key. You magnificent old bastard. You had a contingency for everything, didn't you?" Arthur managed a single blink. Yes. The key, he'd told her years ago, was to a safe deposit box. A box that contained a black ledger. His insurance policy, he'd called it. It held records of every shady deal, every backroom promise, every skeleton in the closet of every powerful person he'd ever dealt with. It was his nuclear option, to be used only in the most dire of circumstances. She had the key. Now she needed the location. "All right, Arthur," she said, pulling out a legal pad. "Let's get to work." Lily arrived with her mother shortly after. The three of them, the brilliant lawyer, the brave little girl, and the terrified but resolute mother, formed an unlikely council of war around his wheelchair. Eleanor, using Lily as her conduit and the crayon-covered board as their medium, began the long, slow process of getting the truth. With agonizing slowness, Arthur spelled out the name of the bank and the box number. But that was just the beginning. The ledger was only a tool. He needed to tell her what Julian was doing. He started with a biotech firm, OMNIGEN. Eleanor's eyebrows shot up. "I saw the press release. A very bold move. NOTBOLDFOOLISH, he spelled. Then, more urgently, ITISASHELLCOMPANY. Eleanor's face went pale. "A shell? Arthur, are you sure?" "Yes." He then directed her to a specific section of the ledger, a cross-reference to a holding company in the Cayman Islands, a company he knew Julian favored for his more creative accounting. He spelled out the connections, the flow of money. Julian wasn't investing in a promising new technology. He was siphoning Penhaligon Corp's assets into a company he secretly controlled, stripping it for parts before the inevitable bankruptcy. He was planning to fleece the company and the stockholders, leave the empire a hollowed-out ruin, and walk away with billions. It was a breathtakingly audacious and utterly ruthless plan. But the theft of his company was only half of the story. There was a darker secret, one he had been too afraid to even articulate to himself. The accident. It hadn't been an accident. He remembered that night in flashes. An argument with Julian. A bitter, vicious fight about the future of the company. Julian had been drinking. Arthur had told him he wasn't ready, that he was too reckless to be his successor. The words had been sharp, cruel. He remembered Julian's face, contorted with rage. He remembered turning to walk away, up the grand staircase. He remembered a hand on his back, a hard, violent shove. Then a sickening, weightless tumble into darkness. Spelling it out was the hardest thing he had ever done. ARGUMENTSTAIRSHEPUSHED-ME. By the time he was finished, the room was shrouded in a horrified silence. Lily was crying softly, her head buried in her mother's side. Maria held her tight, her own face ashen. Eleanor stood staring out the window, her back to the room, her shoulders rigid. When she finally turned around, her face was a terrifying mask of controlled fury. "The police report said you tripped," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Fell. FALLEREPORTTWITNESS. He blinked twice. No, it was his word against Julian's. The word of a man who couldn't speak against a man who was the picture of charm and credibility. And Julian had been clever. He had been the one to find Arthur at the bottom of the stairs. He had been the one to call the ambulance. He had played the part of the distraught, loving nephew perfectly. "He will pay for this, Arthur," Eleanor vowed, her voice low and venomous. "I swear to you on my life, he will pay for what he did to you and what he is doing to your company." The plan they hatched was as audacious as Julian's own. They couldn't go to the police, not yet. They had no proof. They had to expose him, to dismantle his scheme and his credibility in one single devastating blow. The upcoming annual shareholders meeting was in 3 weeks. It would be Julian's coronation, the moment he would officially present his new vision and solidify his control. It would also be their stage. Eleanor would use the information from the Black Ledger to get her hands on the proof of Julian's financial fraud. Maria and Lily would be his voice. Their task was to prepare him, to practice. They needed a faster way to communicate. The alphabet board was too slow for a public forum. The solution came from one of Penhaligon Corp's own R&D labs, a place Arthur had funded for years. It was an experimental brain-computer interface designed for ALS patients. It was a sensitive pad that could detect minute, voluntary muscle contractions, even the tiny, almost imperceptible twitch Arthur had regained in his right thumb. By tapping on the pad, he could select letters from a screen. It was still slow, but it was light years ahead of the alphabet board. Eleanor pulled strings, called in favors, and had a prototype delivered to the penthouse in a plain brown box, installed by a technician who signed a mountain of non-disclosure agreements. The device was their secret weapon. For the next 3 weeks, the penthouse became a command center. While Eleanor worked tirelessly with her team of forensic accountants, digging into the labyrinth of Julian's shell companies, Arthur, Lily, and Maria practiced. Hour after hour, day after day, he would tap out words on the screen with his thumb. At first, his movements were clumsy, the muscle weak and unresponsive. But with Lily's constant, patient encouragement, he grew stronger, faster. "You can do it, Arthur," she would say, her small hand resting on his arm. "Just one more word." He was not just training a muscle. He was relearning how to speak, how to exist in the world. He was fighting his way back, one tapped-out letter at a time. Julian grew more suspicious. He tried to bar Eleanor from the penthouse, but she waved the court order in his face. He questioned the nurses about the new equipment, but Eleanor had created a plausible cover story about it being a new type of physical therapy device. He watched Maria and Lily with a growing sense of unease. He couldn't put his finger on it, but something had shifted. The atmosphere in the penthouse was different. The air of quiet despair had been replaced by a low hum of purpose, an energy he couldn't decipher. He tried to get rid of them. He told the cleaning service their contract was terminated. But Eleanor was one step ahead. She had already hired Maria directly as a personal assistant and companion for Arthur, with a salary that made Maria weep. It was a checkmate. Julian was trapped, unable to remove the very people who were plotting his downfall from right under his nose. He was a spider who sensed a tremor in his web, but couldn't see the hand that was about to tear it all down. The day of the shareholders' meeting arrived. It was a cold, gray morning, the sky the color of slate. The grand ballroom of the hotel was packed. Journalists, analysts, investors, a sea of expensive suits and expectant faces. On the stage, a massive screen displayed the Penhaligon Corp logo. Julian stood at the podium, a portrait of confident, charismatic leadership. He began his speech, his voice resonating through the hall. He spoke of innovation, of a bold and new future, of the difficult but necessary changes he had made. He painted a picture of a company reborn. In the wings, Arthur waited in his wheelchair. Eleanor stood beside him, a grim-faced general. Lily held his hand, her small fingers wrapped tightly around his. Maria stood behind them, a silent, steady presence. Arthur could feel the familiar thrum of stage fright, the adrenaline he hadn't felt in years. His thumb ached from weeks of practice. He was ready. Julian's speech reached its crescendo. "And so," he declared, his arms spread wide, "we honor the past, the incredible legacy built by my uncle, Arthur Penhaligon. We wish him peace in his retirement. But we now look to the future, a new chapter for Penhaligon Corp." At that moment, Eleanor gave the signal. A stagehand wheeled Arthur out from the wings and into the center of the stage. A gasp rippled through the audience. Julian froze, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. He hadn't approved this. Who had dared to bring him out here? He saw Eleanor step up to a second podium, her expression like granite. "Julian, thank you for that performance," she said, her voice amplified throughout the silent hall. "However, there is one shareholder who has not yet been heard from. The majority shareholder, in fact, Mr. Arthur Penhaligon, has a statement to make." A murmur of confusion spread through the crowd. Was this a joke? The man was a vegetable? Julian laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Eleanor, this is cruel. Let the man have his dignity. He can't speak." "Oh, but he can," Eleanor said, her voice dangerously calm. She nodded to the technician, who wheeled a large monitor next to Arthur's chair and connected the pad from his armrest. The screen flickered to life, displaying a blank white page with a blinking cursor. "Arthur," Eleanor said softly. All eyes in the vast hall were on the slumped figure in the wheelchair and the blank screen beside him. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Arthur's mind was a maelstrom of fear. The lights, the faces, the immense pressure. His thumb felt frozen, a useless piece of meat. He felt Lily squeeze his hand. "You can do it, Arthur," she whispered, her voice for his ears alone. He looked at her, at this incredible child who had walked into the darkness and shown him the way out. He took a breath. He focused. He pressed his thumb to the pad. A single letter appeared on the screen. J, then another, U, then an L, I, A, N. Julian's name, standing alone on the screen, was an indictment. The room held its collective breath. Julian's face had gone from smug to shocked to dangerously pale. He gripped the podium, his knuckles white. The letters continued to appear, slow but steady, each one a hammer blow against Julian's carefully constructed world. JULIANISATHIEF. A murmur went through the crowd. Julian stepped forward. "This is absurd! Someone is typing for him. He's a puppet." But then the camera feed on the giant screen behind the stage zoomed in, showing a close-up of Arthur's hand, his thumb, and only his thumb, methodically tapping the pad. There were no wires, no tricks. It was him. He was speaking. The message on the screen continued. HESTOMILLIONG. The mention of the company, a series of documents flashed onto the main screen above Arthur's head. Bank transfers, incorporation papers from the Cayman Islands, emails. Eleanor's team had done their work. It was irrefutable proof of the fraud, laid bare for the entire world to see. Panic erupted. Shouts, flashes from cameras, people standing on their chairs. Julian was trapped in the spotlight, his face contorted in a mask of pure hatred. He stared at Arthur, his eyes wild. You can't," he stammered. But Arthur wasn't finished. He had one more thing to say, the most important thing. His thumb moved, tired but resolute, tapping out the final terrible truth. HEALSOTRIEDTOKILLME. The final sentence hung in the air, sucking all the sound from the room. It was a confession and a conviction. In the stunned silence, the only sound was the quiet sobbing of a little girl on the stage, holding the hand of the man who had found his voice just in time. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Julian was arrested on stage, his protest drowned out by the cacophony of camera shutters. The story was a global sensation, the locked-in billionaire who came back from the dead to expose his own would-be murderer. Penhaligon Corp's stock plummeted and then soared as Eleanor, appointed interim CEO by an emergency board vote, calmly and efficiently dismantled Julian's reckless deals and restored faith in the company. But for Arthur, the real victory wasn't the cheers of the stockholders or the headlines in the papers. It was the quiet moments that followed. His life was forever changed, not just by the technology that gave him back his voice, but by the little girl who had first bothered to listen to the silence. He never regained the ability to move or speak conventionally, but his world, once a prison, was now boundless. He communicated, he worked, he ran his company again, all through the twitch of a single thumb. He established the Penhaligon Foundation for Communication Disorders, funding research into technologies that could give a voice to the voiceless. He ensured that Maria and Lily would want for nothing for the rest of their lives, setting up a trust that would fund Lily's education all the way to the stars, if that's where she still wanted to go. But his greatest gift to them was not money. It was family. They became a strange and beautiful constellation. The silent man, the hard-working mother, and the little girl with the stardust in her eyes. One sunny afternoon, months later, Arthur was in the mansion's garden. The scent of roses hung heavy in the air. Lily sat on the grass beside his chair, reading to him from a new book, this one about a girl who travels to Jupiter. Maria was nearby, tending to the flower beds, humming a soft tune. The sun was warm on Arthur's face. He felt a profound sense of peace he hadn't known even before the accident, back when he had a healthy body and a sick soul. He had spent his whole life building an empire of things, of assets and acquisitions, and had nearly lost himself in the process. It took losing everything to find the only thing that truly mattered. He tapped a short message onto the small screen, now permanently attached to his chair. Lily paused her reading and looked at it. The message was simple. THANKYOU. She smiled, her brilliant, sun-drenched smile. She didn't need the alphabet board anymore. She knew what he meant. She leaned over and gave his motionless hand a squeeze. "You're welcome, Arthur," she said. He watched her, this child, who had taught him a new language, not of letters and words, but of patience, courage, and love. And in the quiet communion of the sunlit garden, Arthur Penhaligon, the man who had lost his voice, had never felt more heard.